Chapter 8. The Eye of Shadow. I saw a hand touch the flame, but remain untouched. Then the formless nothing shifted to frozen fields of blue petals. Pale shadows, cast from nothing, consumed by nothing, stood around a farmer wife. She laughed and danced as they looked on, pale and dead. Around the shadows and the farmer waif were great burning bushes, screaming in endless torment, save for when the farmer girl touched a hand to them. The dying thing soothed in the fleeting touch. The shades grew wroth as the farmer waif pressed a kiss upon the cheek of a weeping woman cast in gold. Upon a scaled and monstrous thing, bleeding tears of morrow red. Upon a corpse wrapped in a net forming a bloated checkerboard pattern, weeping brine. A babe's dying wail screaming from the flame that tormented but did not consume the bushes, drove the dancing wave to wrath. Flesh was parted as grass by the farmer, until the wails faded and the dance began anew. A great hunched skeleton cast in flame was consumed by green vines. It opened its eyes and mouth and spoke to the farmer waif. She danced forwards, stepping over the bones of forgotten sacrifices to cast her arms around the dead thing as it spoke terrible secrets. The shadows approached the farmer waif, formless hands reaching for her when wildfire blasted around them, but did not carry the sickly green, merely white smoke. The shadows were joined by countless faces that looked from beyond the burning bushes, but on the wave danced, heedless. An avaricious hand, slick with iridescent filth, carried a black sword that cast a painfully white light. A fool looked upon the sword as it reflected but a part of the farmer wave. The reflection a dark and terrible thing. A vicious queen carrying a frozen blade before a host of hungry beasts. When the shadows reached the farmer waif with melon tint, the farmer waif touched the pale shadow, confusing and frightening them. Then they faded away, leaving the dancing farmer girl upon a field of blue flowers that changed to green, to blood red, and to yellow and blue again. Winter came and summer, spring and autumn, all in a frenzy. Each season passing in a blink. I tried to look upon her face, but she danced away, again and again, until, upon a whim, she showed me. I saw a pale flame, a cold and silver sun that burned away iridescent light that screamed and trashed and protested. Green and blue and red faded into the farmer girl's light, and she was no longer a waif, but a giant, an Amazon who towered over me. She had no face, just a terrible power that did not burn me but the filth upon me, did not drink, did not consume, and was not consumed in turn. Impossible light became common hues, dull memory became hunger, glamoured wrinkles became laugh lines, blackened flesh became supple, red and healthy, the vigor of youth, the memory of sex and laughter, of what I used to be. I tore away from the flame. The vision did not settle or fade. Bran. Arya had the right stances and moved in the correct ways, but she was slow, clumsy, and not very strong. I turned away her blade and pushed forward with her riposte, doing my best to hit her on the thick leather she was wearing to avoid hurting her when I scored. Each time my blunt blade thwacked her, Arya would cheerfully call out a hit and prance back to the starting position. It was very un-Arya-like to not be a crybaby, but she was not upset in the slightest, and instead seemed thrilled to just be able to play at sword practice. And it was play, or it felt like it. When we actually practiced, it was not with so much armor or padding, and it was not with points being tallied up depending on where you hit, nor would a bout end after a single strike. Ruby came up with all this stuff so that a girl could play practice without getting hurt. It was smart, honestly, and fun, like all the games Ruby came up with. I let out a hiss as Arya struck my forearm, in response to me performing the same parry followed by a lunge that had worked the last 3 times in a row. "Half a point to Arya!" Ruby called out. For a moment I felt like I should grumble or sigh or kick a stone on the ground. But that feeling seemed faint, not real, sweet and insubstantial, like corn. I lifted the small sword. That was the biggest advantage Arya had. Normally I practiced with arming swords, but when I look upon the racks of practice weapons Ruby had made, I don't see a single arming sword. The closest is many hand-and-a-half swords. A question laid on my tongue, but I cannot bring myself to ask why she favored the bastard's blade. "Come on, Bran!" Arya grins. "You have to beat me or Ruby wins!" My sister laughed, clearly eager to extract more secrets from Ruby, even as she is unwilling to throw the practice bout. I step forwards and sweep away her sword, unused how quickly the light blade can be moved back into place to protect against follow-up attacks. It occurs to me that Arya is not incompetent, even if she is far too overeager. She laughs and squeals in delight as I jab the blunted tip of the blade into her belly. Another bout, and another, until there is no sense counting the points as I am so far ahead. But as my gross and sweaty sister throws off her helmet to drink down cool beer, I find her smile infectious. "Well," gasped Arya after drinking deeply, speaking before she could even take a breath. "You promised to tell us everything." She grinned as Ruby planted her hands on her hips. "I so did not promise to tell you everything." She huffed as Arya and I began to pepper her with questions, causing her will to crumble as she held up her hands. "Alright, stop! Look, I will tell you one thing, but it's something that I need your help with. Alright, do we have a deal?" "Deal!" I cried, my voice echoed by Arya, who, despite sparring to exhaustion, found the strength to hop with excitement before Ruby turned about to her workshop, led us inside and pulled the hammer from the wall and pushed it into Arya's hands. "We are going to hit me with this, a few dozen times at least," Ruby told us as we stared at our mad sister, her silver eyes gleaming. Arya. It had been very disappointing to learn that magic was boring. Ruby had followed through with her promise to show us magic. She had showed us magic dozens upon dozens of times. An iron mallet would be held at a certain height, Ruby would hold a thin cut of wood under it and the hammer would be dropped. And the wood would not break. Honestly, my sister's chemistry in cooking was more fun and interesting than her magic. Dropping the hammer on the thin piece of wood was not the first plan. At first we were dropping the hammer on Ruby's foot, until Bran had asked how her aura worked. She had said it was a sort of shield around herself to protect from harm, that she could extend into her clothes and the things she carried, but it was difficult to do that. So Bran had asked why we were risking hurting her foot if she could just use a stick or something. Ruby had gone Ruby, and we had switched to using a stick. Bran and I were forced to count how many times the hammer would fall on the wood until it broke. Then some days later we would do the same thing again. 26 times, then 25 times, then 26 times. Each time at the end when the stick finally broke, Ruby looked exhausted and had to take a nap before she was fine again. Old Nan had told stories of witches and magic and monsters. None of them were ever boring, but then stories rarely included the boring stuff that you had to do, like sewing clothes or going to the privy. Perhaps, in between all the scary stories of wood witches and Essosi sorcerers, they were doing boring magical stuff like dropping hammers on wood. The entire thing made the whispers that had begun to fill Winterfell really stupid. People were treating Ruby differently when she had not changed at all. She was always weird and knew things that no one else did, so it was stupid to pretend something big had changed. In the months since Ruby had gone missing and been found again, Winterfell had turned upside down with preparations for the king and the people with him. It was strange to see Mother and Ruby meeting together almost every other day, and no one seemed to know why. So it was probably magic stuff. Boring magic stuff. Who would ever want magic when you could be a knight? I was distracted from my thoughts when a cry went up, followed by horns and drums, sounding out in a dizzying wave of sound. Knights and sworn swords and free riders flowed through the gates of Winterfell carrying banners of gold and red and black and green. What must have been 1,000 painted stags and many more lions fluttered in the northern wind. Plate and mail, painted and gold, silver or polished steel caught the sun in the gleaming procession. Swords and lances and maces hung from belts or were strapped to horses that pranced upon the main road. The faces and armaments were varied and, as Ruby would say, so cool! There, a golden-haired knight in gleaming white armor that could only be the Kingslayer. There was a giant man with a burned face riding alongside a tall boy in red leathers with a sword at his hip. I grinned as I counted every sword and every helmet. Yes, it was doubtless that knights were so much more interesting than magic. I was so hypnotized by the knights and sworn swords that I did not pay attention to the giant fat man at the head of the column, as he threw himself from his warhorse and ran up to Faber with an elated shout. I stared, mouth agape, as the fat man wrapped Faber in a hug, pulling him from his feet before setting him down with a wide grin. Sansa and Mother looked mortified, and I felt Sansa elbow me when I laughed. "Ned, it's good to see that frozen face of yours." The fat man looked him up and down and laughed. "You've not changed at all, old friend." Father looked down at the fat man's belly and up at his face, before he raised an eyebrow. There was a strange quiet that fell over the courtyard before the fat man let out another roar of laughter, this time joined by Father. "Your Grace, Winterfell is yours," Father said at last, and it finally dawned on me that this was the King, Robert Baratheon, the demon of the Trident. Where was his hammer? His helmet? Why had he gotten fat? I watched as the King turned to embrace Mother with much greater respect than he had Father, but it seemed like he and Father were good friends, so that was fine. The knights were dismounting, and northern men made way to attend to them as they did so. From the gate came many more people, women and children who had not ridden a horse with carriages that must have still been outside. There was said to be a giant carriage with 2 floors pulled by 40 horses. There was no way that could fit through the gate. Father knelt to kiss the ring on a golden-haired woman that must have been the Queen. Then we were called forwards to meet the King's children, and I did a perfect introduction to them, just like I promised Ruby. Then we had to stand around for ages as a bunch of boring stuff that was tradition had to be done before Father and the King left together, even as the Queen had protested that they should eat and warm themselves first. The Kingslayer had taken the Queen's arm and led her away as everyone began to make their way to the Great Hall, where a feast had been prepared. Sansa had complained to Mother that Ruby was nowhere to be found, but Mother would not hear of it. And Ruby had already said that she was quite happy to skip the feast and planned to eat before the King would arrive. She had said there was a surprise planned for nightfall, but when I had asked about it, she had grinned and told me to ask Mother. It was queer, so queer for them to act together like this. After everyone but our family and the Kings had been seated in the Great Hall, a procession was made. Father escorted the Queen, the King escorted Mother, even if he looked a bit tired and half in his cups. It was more like she was escorting him. All the children were paired together. I linked arms with Tommen. He was friendly enough, but had confessed that he did not know much about knights or battles. We made our way to the head table and sat. Many things were said, then we ate and talked quietly amongst ourselves. Tommen and I played a game where we told a tale together that Ruby had taught me, and he seemed to enjoy it, but eventually he looked rather tired. I too felt my eyelids growing heavy. What must have been 3 or 4 hours into the feast, Father and Mother stood and addressed the hall, inviting everyone out to the courtyards. The cold night air woke me up. The Queen looked rather annoyed to be standing outside on a northern night. Hundreds of men and women ambled about in the courtyard and adjoining spaces waiting. It was when mumbling turned to grumbles when there was a ferocious bang, and everyone save Mother and Father was startled as red fire filled the night sky. The sound instantly reminded me of the noises that would come when Ruby was experimenting with stuff, and such bangs would always come before Ruby got a telling to from Mother. There was a shriek, followed by another bang and another. Green and red and yellow lights filled the sky as hundreds stood dumbfounded. I could not understand how it was possible, but the lights continued, more frequent and more furious again and again and again, each more dazzling than the last, until there was a moment of quiet, and a bang greater than all the others, casting sparks of red and gold across the starry night sky. "Welcome to the North, Your Grace," Father said, his voice carrying over the silence as the king roared in approval and slapped his hands together, quickly joined by everyone who had come from the south and the northerners too. It was Ruby. It had to be. Perhaps magic was not quite so boring as I thought.